Okay, go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody. I'm gonna just take a couple of minutes, just like a minute or two.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. So, my name is Ahmed Hassani, and I am a person in long-term recovery, first and foremost, which means I have not had a drink or misused any substances since August 28th of 2007. And I'm grateful for that because it's given me a lot of really wonderful opportunities to be present in the lives of the people that I love and also to pursue possibilities that weren't there for me when I was drinking and using drugs, like attending Texas Tech University, like Kristen had mentioned earlier, and then now Ohio State for my graduate degrees, and lots of really cool once-in-a-lifetime opportunities that recovery opened the door to for me. And I'm also, I want to make sure to say that I'm also a member of a 12-step organization. And the reason I say that is because I want to be upfront about any perception or any view, anything that might, influence my thoughts and ideas around this topic, because it's one which is really important and meaningful to so many people. And yeah, and also that I am a person whose life has been affected not only by my own substance use, but by the substance use and mental health disorders of my loved ones, which made going to college didn't always seem like a possibility. And so collegiate recovery allowed me the opportunity to attend college that I might not have had even if I wasn't a person in recovery. And so I appreciate the social justice implications of collegiate recovery, and I think that that is important to keep in mind throughout the discussion that we have today.
Thank you, Ahmed. I really appreciate those points, and we'll make sure to get to those through our questions. Jay, go ahead and introduce yourself to folks too.
All right, how's everybody doing? My name is Jay Harris. I'm a recovery ally. I'm the program coordinator here at East Carolina University for our collegiate recovery community. I'm also a two-time alum of ECU, and so starting the program here on our campus was a really big thing for me, and something that I take a lot of pride in. And so there's a lot that I connect with the students just because I am an alum, and there's elements and pieces of our campus culture that make a lot of sense to me, and it makes a lot of sense to the students. And so that's how we kind of operate and navigate our process in starting our program. Our program only started in 2015, so we're still very new, very young in the growth process of it all. But I think that it's presented us with some really cool challenges and some interesting and new ways to kind of look at some things that older programs, might see a bit differently. And so excited to have this conversation.
Thank you so much both for joining us today. I really appreciate it. So we're going to just jump right in, since we had a little bit of a technical glitch earlier, so we don't waste any more time. And just ask, what are your opinions of ARET's new stance on abstinence being the gold standard of collegiate recovery? Ahmed, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to. I think that for me, I think that I don't know. To me, this was something that had gone unspoken for a very long time. I always was a believer that abstinence was the gold standard of collegiate recovery. And to be honest, I think abstinence is the gold standard of recovery in general. And the reason why is because it's the best possible health outcome for somebody with a substance use disorder. And in saying that, I want to honor the hard work of the people who have been reducing harm for individuals with a substance use disorder for generations, saving lives and enabling people to stay healthy, so that when abstinence became an option, they had a reason to live, right? They hadn't contracted a disease. They hadn't done irreparable harm to their bodies and to their spirits. And, I think that that's so important that we honor this idea that we're supposed to meet people where they're at. But, I also want to honor the fact that in the year 2019, it's never been more difficult to be a college student than it is today, for all the stressors and all the things that go into being a college student. And I think those of us who are listening and work on college campuses know that. And to then manage a substance use disorder in a way that you are either early in recovery or you are not in complete remission from your substance use, I just, it would be really difficult to understand how a student could be successful, thrive, and flourish academically, personally, and in their recovery while living in an abstinence hostile environment, and trying to do that while managing all the different stressors and all the difficulties that come with being a college student. And so I think, just if we're being honest and we think about other chronic diseases and how they are treated, if somebody is diabetic, there's a gold standard for what you want their blood sugars to be at. And if a doctor met with a client and provided crisis stabilization and helped them get their blood sugar down, but then stopped because they said, this is enough growth, right? Or they didn't continue pushing and urging the client to continue making the necessary lifestyle changes to be as healthy as possible, we say that the doctor wasn't doing their job. And I think that there's a bedside manner and a tact to meeting with individuals with a substance use disorder. You can't force them to do anything that they don't want to, but that doesn't mean that the goal for any student that I work with isn't for them to have the best possible outcome that they can. And it's not, I don't think it's arguable that abstaining from drugs and alcohol is the healthiest decision any human being can make, whether you're in recovery or not.
Thanks, Ahmed. I really appreciate that. And Jay, what is your kind of stance on the new standard, or the new spoken standard?
Right. I definitely would agree that abstinence would be the best outcome. I think there's a bit more in nuance to that could be addressed a little bit more and kind of allowed to be expressed from campus to campus in some ways. But I definitely agree that having a standard set, it makes sense. But I think that there's just a way of maybe navigating it a bit that doesn't seem so triggering to some other campuses that aren't quite there yet.
Right. No, I appreciate that. I think that's a really good point as well. So just as a follow-up to, just your initial introduction into the idea of creating these safe spaces on campus for abstinence-based students, what are some examples of recovery supports that you're providing to students at your Collegiate Recovery Program? And Jay, we'll start with you since Ahmed went first last time.
Okay, so here at ECU, some of the things that we do to provide space and opportunity for students in recovery really is literally having that physical space. We have a designated space on campus for students to hang out, drop in and do meetings, hold space and for check-ins with one another. Students check in with me periodically. We also host sober events and things of that nature. And really, I think if anything, our program just in our development right now really is a social environment. In the past, we've tried to have a 12-step meeting on campus, but just where we are culturally in Eastern North Carolina, it's really not feasible to have a 12-step meeting on our campus that the local 12-step community is comfortable with seeing. And so we had to kind of take a step back and provide other space and opportunities for our students here on this campus.
That's great, Jane. Let me just ask you a quick follow-up question. So those social support activities or events or just fun hanging out and stuff that you guys do all the students that attend those have to report that they are abstinent based, or can anybody show up and have a good time?
Anyone. We ask that students not show up under the influence, and if they are hanging out with us, that they're not glamorizing their substance use.
That's great. And so do you have a dedicated space at ECU where the students come and they know there's not going to be any drugs or alcohol in that space?
Absolutely. Yep. And that space is located in our counseling center, and students can access that between the hours of 8 to 5.
Okay. And so for those students that want to access the space, is there a criteria that they must meet a certain amount of abstinence time before they have access to it?
No, this is just an agreed upon. Most students don't even know it exists. So
Right.
in order for them to even know that it's there, they've either met with me or they know a student in recovery that's kind of invited them into that space.
Okay, cool. So it sounds like what you have set up there is really inclusive, right? And so even though the students know that, drugs and alcohol are not going to be in the space where they meet with you, or it's not going to be part of the event,
Right.
it's not like you guys are cutting off students that maybe are sober curious from accessing some of those supports, both with you directly and with the social events.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool, thanks. And Ahmed, you want to kind of hop in there and tell us about the Ohio State?
Yeah. It's not too much different from the great work that y'all are doing in North Carolina. I think we have or I know that we have a lounge on campus. That's what we call it, a drop-in center for students who are in recovery. It is one that a CRC student gets 24/7 access to, and that's also where our offices are located, myself and my colleague, the Collegiate Recovery staff here at Ohio State. We have a Collegiate Recovery residence hall. I really try to navigate away from calling it recovery housing because there are certain expectations that come with recovery housing, and we don't have the infrastructure to provide the type of accountability that I think many think of when they think of recovery housing. And so we're a residence hall, which is designated for students in recovery so that they can live near each other and support one another. And we also do things like give out scholarships. I think the most important thing that we do is we do focus on the students' health and wellness. And we do it with individualized recovery plans. And so we meet with students every semester, and we talk about what their goals are academically, personally, and in recovery, and we help them to meet those goals throughout the semester and encourage them. And we also do professional and leadership development, which is all, for me, another aspect to why the abstinence is important, because I think it gives us the basis that we can then focus on things that are outside of, we do recovery support stuff, but we also want to build them up as future professionals and young professionals and enable them to leave here and be successful in their, and talk about the things that are difficult when you transition out of being a student in the Collegiate Recovery Program. Like, what is it like to go to a job market where happy hour is the norm? And how do you still advance in a career where you have social expectations as well as professional expectations, and a lot of the things that our students are going to have to deal with. And so we really try to prepare them as much as possible to be successful, because it's our job to serve them as students and as alumni, in my opinion. And then we also have a duty to, we're the land grant institution of Ohio, and so we have a duty to Ohioans. And so we serve all individuals that are interested in going back to college and display that interest to us. And so we try to be the beacon of hope for people in recovery throughout the state, that they too can one day attend. And I want to emphasize one day, because not everybody's ready to go to college. That they can one day go to school, and that they can, attain the whatever dream it is that they've created for themselves, that higher education is going to help them get to.
That's a really great point, Ahmed. And I love the idea that you guys are really trying to focus on, especially probably your seniors that are transitioning, into a professional role, and then also your alumni, because, unfortunately, a few, rare instances, I've seen collegiate recovery students get almost institutionalized by the collegiate recovery programs. And so they've become so dependent on the programs and on the staff, they actually have cut back on their individual recovery program.
Right.
Are you seeing that? Are you trying to address and kind of prevent that from happening by making sure that the students are connected with, local groups or whatever chosen recovery pathway they have?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I learned as a student, and I don't say this as a judgment to the institution that I went to, because it revolutionized my life in a way that I'm eternally grateful for. I wouldn't be sitting in front of you today if it wasn't for the collegiate recovery community at Texas Tech. And so, but one of the things that I realized is that a lot of my peers were, and I saw it as a student, and I see it now as a staff, is that what happens is that the collegiate recovery program becomes your recovery program. And it shouldn't be that. It should be something that augments your recovery. It should be something that helps to increase your recovery, but it shouldn't be your recovery. And so one of the things we intentionally do is limit the amount of meetings we provide on campus, because we don't want the only interaction with recovery that they receive to be with their students. They need to be out in the recovery community, learning from other people as well, and gaining as many perspectives as possible. And so, Absolutely. Trying to prepare them to be successful, not only the 3 hours a week that they're with us, but all of the other hours of the week that they are a student, a son, a daughter,
Mhm.
and everything all the different roles that they fill.
And I wonder, and this probably leads into our next question, but I wonder if part of that preparation is also maybe educating them that not everybody does recovery the same way that they do. And I'm a 12-stepper as well. And, Ahmed and I have shared a lot around that, offline and personally about, what it looks like to be a so-called kind of strong, really into that culture, but then also, practice the tolerance and the open-mindedness to be willing to have coffee or sit down or hang out with somebody that is an atheist or is practicing yoga as a recovery pathway. Just how are you guys helping your students to really kind of protect their recovery, whatever that pathway is, but also not be, I guess I'll just say it, not be judgmental or so elite in their pathway that they maybe are pushing students away.
Yeah. I'll take that
Mhm.
first. So,
Sure.
ECU, right? Well, we don't have any meetings technically on campus currently. Um, it really is highlighting what's available in our community. And to be honest and fair, there's really not a lot of options.
Mhm.
Um, the 12-step community is fairly strong, but it's older. I mean, I asked the student who's working the 12-step pathway now, and I asked them, what is the young people community in Greenville right now? And he said it's me and another student in the program. And I said, oh, wow. So that would just highlight it to me when students are looking for support, they're going to the meetings just across the street from campus, and there's really no one there that looks like them from a youth demographic standpoint. And so that can be a challenge. And in that, at the same time, um, students who are doing the work in 12-step programs, and it's not a knock on 12-step, but it's the only thing that they know because that is what's promoted in Eastern North Carolina. If you go to treatment, which is few and far between in this area, you will likely be bussed off to a 12-step meeting 2 to 3 times a week while you're in treatment, and that's what they're introducing you to. And there's really no other exploration of other things out there. I was lucky working in a treatment center for high school students that we used a program called 7 Challenges. Um, and even then, we were still taking students to a meeting, a 12-step meeting once a week, and actually had been doing so more often until we realized that we were kind of taking away some of their autonomy to choose what pathway they might have been looking for. And so here on campus now at ECU, we really help to show students the other options, even if they're not available necessarily here on campus or in our community, that, giving them the resources, they can find them online, like Smart Recovery Meetings. Choice in Recovery is an organization out of Denver, Colorado, that lists many different pathways to recovery and how to connect to those. And so that's an option and a resource that we utilize here on our campus.
Thanks, Jay. I appreciate that. That's a really good gosh, that's such a great point. I often forget because I'm in the Atlanta area and there's so many different options here. For 10 years ago when I was living in South Georgia, in rural South Georgia, there were 2 options, AA or NA, and that was basically it, or church. And I often forget that that's one of the reasons why, the prevalence of 12-step is because there just simply are not that many options. Ahmed, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I think that the 12-step community is widely, it has a strong influence on recovery, and not just within people in recovery, but also the laymen out there who have a very, very small understanding of addiction and then the recovery process. They just associate it with, whether because of the influence of society, the influence of media, the influence of movies, Hollywood, and that's just how recovery has been portrayed for so long. And so I think that it's difficult because you want to be inclusive. And like for example, at Ohio State, our student body is, I'd say, 90% identify as being in recovery through a 12-step community, which is great. You know, they have a program of recovery outside of here, but that's not by design on our part. And so what we do for the students who don't identify that way is we just give them a basic expectation. You know, you don't have to go to 12-step meetings. You don't have to be a member of the 12-step community, you know, but what we do need you to do, and at Ohio State, we utilize, because there's no definitive definition of recovery, we utilize the Betty Ford definition. We like the Betty Ford definition. And so that one really talks about there being a process, right? And so the thing is we just need you to identify what your process is. How do you maintain your recovery? Right? It doesn't have to, we don't have any input on how you have to maintain your recovery, but tell us a process. You know, tell me what you do on a day-to-day basis, a week-to-week basis. How do you build yourself up emotionally, physically, spiritually? And how are you going to continue doing that when, you know, finals kicks in and you don't know, you know, and you're pulling all-nighters, you're studying, you're really pressed. Like, what are the things that you can go back to maintain your recovery? And so we just challenge students to not accept that there's only one way to get to recovery, but instead to define their own way, because even the 12 steps are an individualized process. You know, the experience I had as a 12-step member is not the same experience Kristen had as a 12-step member, nor should it be, you know? And so I think that that's important to emphasize to students, is that their recovery needs to be personal to them. And all we want to do is help them find what works. And so one of the ways we do that is we have our weekly recovery support meetings, and we ask our students to be the chairs of those meetings, right? And so they're not 12-step meetings. They're open to all pathways of recovery, and we ask them to bring something different to the meetings, right? We don't want to read from the big book. We don't want to read from the basic text. We want to hear about something everybody can do to grow in their recovery on a day-to-day basis, on a week-to-week basis. And so we challenge them to think outside the box. And that helps our students who are in the 12-step programs think about it in a way which is greater than the confinements of the 12-step rooms, because there are lots of ways to grow spiritually. There are lots of ways to evolve and be healthier and more well. And so we just want them to not settle. And so we just try to create an inclusive environment by setting the standard of inclusiveness, you know, that all pathways aren't just welcomed, but they're celebrated, and we want to learn about them. You know, if you have a pathway that I've never heard of, I need to learn about it, because there's something that might benefit me there. And so that's the attitude that we take, one of curiosity and one of welcoming. And so, you know, it's just our job to set the tone, and our students have seemed to follow the tone that we try to set.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that phrase. You know, it's not that it's inclusive, but it's celebrated. And I guess that this, you know, maybe one of the issues around the conversation is the multiple pathways could also include harm reduction, right? Or, you know, maybe really splitting hairs, so to speak, and saying, you know, I'm in recovery for my alcoholism, but I can still smoke marijuana successfully. And so I think that, you know, really encompassing abstinence as a gold standard, we have to ask those questions. Well, what about the students that are still smoking pot, but they do consider themselves in recovery? You know, and I think that it is very important for a national organization and for the individual campuses to set some kind of standard, some kind of boundaries that fits for the culture, right, of the campus. I've worked with some grantees in Western states that are actually not big 12-step communities, and, you know, practice more smart moderation management and those types of things. But currently they wouldn't fit that standard, right? Because abstinence isn't their gold standard. Their gold standard is to do no harm. And by doing no harm, they also, you know, have really created a very inclusive environment, but the abstinence-based students aren't necessarily showing up as much, right? And so I think that just inherently we're going to have conflicts between these two different types of cultures, abstinence-based and moderation management or harm reduction. And you know, it's a quandary. I really, you know, having this conversation and really just hearing about the supports that you guys are offering and knowing what is available to other schools out there. It is almost like everybody is trying to be as inclusive as possible, and supportive to those students and do no harm to all students on their campuses. But I think that as a recovery community, this is really on us, as those of us in recovery that are a part of the recovery culture. We should be teaching those that are coming up behind us a little bit earlier in their recovery that you don't have to be scared of other pathways. Just
Right.
because somebody else is smoking pot successfully does not mean that you're going to relapse because you think that you can do it too. Ahmed said it needs to be an individual process, and I think that we have to really educate our students on what that looks like, and obviously provide a safe space, literally the environment where the Collegiate recovery community is.
Absolutely. And not to
Jay,
stay on this too long, but again, as a recovery ally, I always feel like I'm looking at this from the outside looking in with just a slightly different perspective. But one thing I've gathered is when most individuals say they're inclusive of multiple pathways to recovery, what they really mean to say is they're inclusive of multiple pathways of abstinence. And the minute you start talking about any type of harm reduction or any variance of recovery that doesn't fully include abstinence, they start to shut off their ears and they don't want to hear what you have to say. And that can be challenging and problematic, especially on a college campus when you have students who are, as I like the term used by UC Boulder or CU Boulder, of sober curious, or
right,
these students who recognize they have challenges with substance use and not exactly sure exactly what the next step is going to be quite yet, but they do know that there's a collegiate recovery community on their campus that is helping students address that. But they're not fully on board with being completely abstinent yet at 18, 19, even 22 years old because they're thinking too far along ahead and trying to think about what life is going to look like at 60 years old rather than taking it a day at a time and really working through that process. And I feel like as a collegiate recovery community, whether it be myself as the staff or our students, to help them kind of identify what that looks like for them and setting those individualized plans so they can be the best selves.
right. Yeah,
And
and we can move on to the next question too, because I don't want to waste too much time on this. But the medication-assisted recovery phrase, most of you probably have heard it as medication-assisted treatment. I'm part of an advocacy group that would really like to change the language around that, but that's like a totally different webinar. So how do you guys address the medically assisted recovery? I know Ohio State was probably one of the first collegiate recovery. So if you want to just go ahead and go over that, that'd be great.
yeah, absolutely. And for the sake of moving on for time, I just want to say though that being an abstinence-based collegiate recovery program, my underlying principle is still to do no harm. And that it's and that just because we believe that abstinence is the gold standard doesn't mean we don't serve students who are moderating or are struggling with maintaining their recovery. There's still services that we provide them as well. And one of which is a medication-assisted recovery program, which is comprehensive and is a partnership between ourselves. We identified campus partners who had a heart for the work that we were doing and were able to help in a way that we couldn't, and which is providing medication to individuals who are utilizing medication-assisted recovery. And so it is a comprehensive program with the student health services at Ohio State, who are practitioners that can prescribe the different medications used in this form of this pathway to recovery, and also with the counseling and consultation services who can provide the psychological services and the counseling that we don't provide because we're not a therapeutic community. We are a peer-to-peer recovery support community. And so the three of us come together to try to provide a comprehensive service to the students who utilize this, because it's important that they, that if we're going to do this, that we do it right. We're not just prescribing them medication and not then giving them the social supports and the psychological supports that they need in order to thrive in their recovery. And so that's something that we do, and that I'm grateful that we're able to provide at Ohio State. and the way we address it within our community. Because again, just because I'm a 12-step member doesn't mean that I don't see the fallacies of many 12-step meetings and 12-step groups, right? It's one of the things we regularly address is the fact that medication-assisted recovery is abstinence-based recovery within our community, and it's something that we've long believed. Right, we've felt this way for a long time. Abstinence has always been our gold standard. It was when we agreed to help create the program, and it still is today. And I would like, one of the things that I've read that I thought was great is in the UK drug policy. They say that voluntarily sustained control over substance use. Right, and so are you voluntarily controlling your substance use? And with medication assisted recovery, doing so in a manner where you are not misusing substances for the purpose of, the effects that they cause. And so for me, it's always been that this is abstinence. And so that is the culture that we're trying to create within our community of students, and that we've definitely created on our campus, is that if you're taking a medication as prescribed by your doctor and you are living up to the agreement that you made with that doctor so that they would prescribe you that medication, because an ethical doctor isn't going to prescribe it to you without offering the rest of the comprehensive services that should go along with it, then you're as in recovery as I am, who hasn't drank or used any drugs for 10 years, right? You're just as in recovery as I am. Just as if a person who had a mental health disorder, if they were prescribed a drug that somebody might use or misuse, if they're taking it as prescribed and they need it, then they're in recovery. And the 12 steps, and I think it's important to recognize that there are no leaders in 12-step programs. And if you go to a group and their attitude is anything but what I just said, that's an individual expressing their opinion that doesn't belong in that meeting either. And that's the fallacy that we see oftentimes, is that there are these perceived leaders and they're not leaders. That each 12-step group is a thing, an organism in and of itself. And I hope that any student who goes to one meeting and has a negative experience, I just hope that they have an opportunity to find somebody who's going to understand that recovery is, it doesn't look the same for anybody. And if they decide not to go back to a 12-step meeting, they have every right not to, because they can still be in recovery without them. You don't need the 12 steps to find recovery and to maintain recovery. But if they decide that they want to, I hope that they know that there are meetings out there where they're going to be welcomed and accepted. I know the meetings that I choose to go to. If this is an issue, and if you are in medication-assisted recovery and that means you can't be there, then I can't be there either, because it goes against my values and principles as a person in long-term recovery.
Yeah, same. Yeah, and Jay, I'm going to ask you the next question, because having visited ECU and met some of your students who were lovely, I feel like you guys really have figured out a way to not only be inclusive of multiple pathways, but also of allies. And so if you could just say just a couple of words about, how your students approach creating a community, that would be great.
Yeah. Again, starting the program as an ally, as a graduate student, we really saw it as a benefit to have students who are interested, whether they're coming from the helping field of counseling or social work, or a biology student who has a loved one in recovery, or maybe looking for recovery. Those students have voice and an impact on our campus. And so we started, basically our group started with a group of allies looking to create space and opportunity for students in recovery or seeking recovery. And with that kind of attitude and mindset, we found a nice way of kind of combining things and, helping students recognize that while college has typically been seen as, I know a lot of people say, an abstinence hostile environment, I say a recovery hostile environment. There are plenty of students on our campuses that are open and welcome to creating those more inclusive environments that are just providing that space and opportunity. And so when it comes to our students who are in recovery and how they feel about both the allies and then even students who aren't working necessarily abstinence-based programs, You know, it's the idea and an understanding that we're all here to get our recovery for however we need it. I like to say that, you know, for some recovery for some recovery is a destination, right? Like they're trying to get there. They don't know exactly what it looks like quite yet, but for others, it's a lifestyle. They figured it out. They're working it. They're in maintenance, and they're continually just kill it on every step of the way. But for all of us, it's a journey. It's a process, and so we support each other through that mantra on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I've always kind of believed the same, and everything you guys have talked about today, it has really resonated. And over the past 10 years of working in the field, I just really I've challenged myself at times with, being somebody in recovery, working in the profession, and being a 12-stepper. Do I consider abstinence as an outcome of recovery, or is that a process in itself? Is recovery a process and abstinence an outcome? And, so are we collegiate recovery abstinence programs, or are we collegiate recovery programs? And so I think that, as we are, so it is a kind of a new, community nationally. I mean, we're only about 30, 35 years old if you look at the grand scheme of things. As we're shaping our identity, I think that, that's a really good point, Jay, is it about the process of recovery, or are we, of course, because we're educators, right, researchers, looking for an outcome of abstinence? And, I think that is also kind of in conflict with just the culture of education, higher education in itself, because it really is, even though we love the learning process, it really is about the grade. It's about graduation. It's about results. It's about an outcome. And so recovery really just kind of called that into question in a way.
Yeah, I like to say too, and I'm sorry, Ahmed. I like to say too that on the college campus, the outcome is graduation. So if we're getting students to graduate and be successful in their field, then we've done our jobs.
Right.
Yeah, and I agree 110% with everything that's being said, but I think also, like, one of the things that I have to be mindful of as a professional, and I encourage other professionals working in this field to do as well, is to not only understand what I can provide, but understand what my limitations are.
Right.
And so if I invite a student to come to my campus who is moderating a substance which is potentially life-threatening, and by inviting them to this campus, I'm making them make a very big decision too, which includes finances, includes possibly moving, leaving a support system, all the things that students in recovery have to do when they go to a new institution. And now they're coming with the fact that they have a substance use disorder, which they are still currently living with. Am I doing what's best for them, and can I provide them the support that they need to make sure that the decision they make doesn't hurt them and isn't catastrophic?
Yeah.
And so, this is like, when we talk about moderation, I think it's simple. The easy way to say is that people in moderation recovery should be a part of collegiate recovery programs. But I think the ethical dilemma is that moderating recovery can mean a lot of different things, right? Moderating your alcohol use, but saying I still smoke weed every now and then is different than the way an IV heroin user moderates their heroin use. And so who are we talking about? And also, one thing I know is that collegiate recovery is a very young field, and we are not nearly where we need to be as far as how many collegiate recovery programs there are throughout the country. And I'm grateful to be here sitting with 3 people who are dedicated to making that a reality, that there's one on every campus across the country, right? But one thing I do know that there is throughout the country is there are services like Basics and K6, which help students learn how to moderate their alcohol use, and there are counseling departments whose entire philosophy on AOD is moderation. And so I don't know that there is a harm in saying that there are services for you on this campus. I can serve you as the director of this program, and there are services on this campus for you, but I don't know if the best thing for our community is for you to be a part of it at this time, because it's an ethical dilemma, and how do you overcome that ethical dilemma? What's best for one goose might not be what's best for the gander. And who are we here to protect, and what's my charge as the director of a program? Like, this is such a convoluted discussion that it's just, it's really something that you have to look in deep and be completely honest with yourself of what you're capable of. And when a parent calls me and asks me, can my student come be a part of that program? I say no to so many students, parents, and families every semester and every year, and I'm doing no harm in saying no. It's not that I don't want them to graduate from Ohio State or don't want them to graduate from school, but I also don't want them to die, and I don't want them to make a huge catastrophic decision. And so I say no, not yet. Not
Right.
no forever, but not yet. Please take care of yourself and be well before you come here. And that,
Right.
that's the right thing to do in many situations,
Right. And I think that it's really tricky too, because if that student that is trying moderation says that they are in recovery, right? So if they come to you and say, I am working a recovery program, I, drink a beer every now and then, but I do consider myself in recovery. So at that point, we have to make not only an ethical decision, but we actually have to make a full-fledged judgment. It's black and white, right? There is no you're either in recovery according to our definition or you're not. And I think that just that one decision is where the do no harm comes into play. Because if that student is trying to do moderation and considers himself to be in recovery, and you say that they can't access the space or the services, where's that student going to go to try to, work on a recovery program, right? And that's what's tricky. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that over the years, I've had that happen, and I have felt, because it's easy, right? In my personal life, if I see somebody at a meeting and they're like, yeah, I'm thinking about it, I'm not really sure. It's like, totally easy, because the only requirement for a 12-step membership is a desire, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So they just have a desire to go to a meeting. They have a desire to either stop or cut back or whatever. And, in these spaces, because we're also bound to liability issues on college campuses, we're bound to, department policies and procedures. And so I think this speaks to the importance of also having really strong relationships for referrals, right? So going to like a basics program or even off-campus referrals or other things, and really, patching together the quilt for a full continuum of support, because that's where our students end up, overdosing or dropping out or dying. I mean, just is in those cracks, right? And so we say we only serve, this part of the continuum of recovery, which is fine, but we also have a responsibility, if students are seeking those types of services, to make sure that we know what those resources are. So
and I agree 110%. And I think that what we need to start doing as a field is realizing that we're not supposed to be creating a recovery ready space on campus, but we're supposed to be creating recovery ready campuses, and doing that by bringing in campus partners and things like that. And again, I don't want it to this isn't, I don't want to, the stance I'm taking, I want it to be understood that I'm not saying that we don't serve those students, but what I'm saying is that there's more to, the health of the community and the health of a large group of students at times is going to take precedence over one student's interest in wanting to be involved in a community. If that, you're right, the desire to stop drinking is all you need for a 12-step program. But if you're in moderation and you don't plan on ever abstaining, is the desire to be there, you know what I mean? And so you could even use that same principle, right? If your desire is to just control your use, well, then I can connect you with lots of resources that can help you do that, because what we know about the 20 million people in recovery is that the smallest sect of that is the people who are in abstinence-based recovery, which is through a program. And so these programs were designed to serve those students because they are the smallest sect, and they are the ones who are having the most difficult feat ahead of them, maintaining their recovery when they have a disease which is actively causing them to want to drink and use drugs and to make very unhealthy decisions. They're the most at risk of that population, and that's why you can argue that, and that's why our programs are designed to serve them.
Yeah, and I know we're short on time, but I want to add this as well. I think, again, it goes back to how you set the culture of your organization. Because I have many students who come to me maybe with this idea of moderation or just trying to figure it out. But once they get around us and figure out what the students in our group are really about, they'll come to me respectfully and say, you know what, I appreciate what you're trying to do. I'm gonna slide back because I don't want to jeopardize somebody else's recovery. They still
Absolutely.
text me. They still, can make me one-on-one. Then they come back to the group. Usually about a year and a half to 2 years later, when they realize, oh crap, I need to graduate and get this stuff together.
Right. Yeah,
And
that's a good point.
yeah, and we have lots of those students too, and we still meet with them one-on-one. And our recovery meetings are open to the public. So you don't just have to be abstinence-based Ohio State student in recovery. You could be anybody. We have students who come to learn by sitting who have nothing to do with recovery, nursing students who come and learn by sitting in our meetings, and we're open to it. Our students are open to it, so they can come to those meetings. But there are certain boundaries that have to be set to make sure the community is safe, and
Right.
that the community and that the students who are in early recovery and are trying to abstain because they've tried to moderate and couldn't. And abstinence is the option that they have left because they don't want to die and they want to live and have a fruitful life, that they need to be protected as well.
Yeah, and I always like to say to those students that are questioning or moderating that if you don't have a substance use disorder, then it shouldn't be a problem for you to abstain when you're with the collegiate recovery people.
Right.
Because if it's a problem, then if you can't not drink or use around your friends, then you may want to take a really serious look at it, because it's really not, it shouldn't be a problem.
Right.
So anyway, we are over the top of the hour. We actually answered all of the questions that came in during the conversation through our discussion. I am so excited to do a follow-up to this particular webinar with Teresa Johnson from Kennesaw State, who is actually going to talk about how to weave recovery support services into the fabric of a full continuum, which is what she has done at Kennesaw over the past 11 years. It's a really impressive model. So please join us, mark it on your calendar for March 7th, 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. And here is our contact information. If you want to get in touch with any of the panelists today, please jot this down. Again, we will have the recording uploaded onto the YouTube channel if you would like to share it. And I just want to say a huge thank you to Ahmed and to Jay for the very rich discussion. And we hopefully will keep the conversation going with some additional ways to do that, maybe at the conference or something, I don't know. But I learned a lot, and you guys really helped me shift some of my perspective on this. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you both. Yeah.
All right, everybody, have a wonderful week. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.